Well, we hope that all of you had a very happy Easter. Now, millions of Americans went to church yesterday, including President Obama, but most of you probably didn't hear your priest or your pastor imply that half of the country were racist, misogynistic bigots. But that was the Easter Sunday sermon for the president. Now, Reverend Luis Leon, the 63-year-old pastor at St. John's Episcopal Church in Washington, D.C., used his pulpit to deliver a scathing attack on conservative Christians. And as reported by several news outlets, Leon said, quote, "It drives me crazy when the captains of the religious right are always calling us back. For blacks to be back in the bus, for women to be back in the kitchen, for immigrants to be back on their side of the border." And so I'm guessing, Eric, that this was a very different message than you heard yesterday in church and a lot of us out there. And it just seemed to me, on a day of such inspiration, and arguably the holiest day, this was probably not the right message.
Probably not. Yeah, my priest actually went through John 20, which is the verse that talks about when Mary Magdalene found Jesus' tomb open and his body was gone. But then at some point, John, who wrote the chapter, also said he was one of the disciples who ran fast to the tomb, basically calling himself, from the third person, a faster runner than St. Peter. So that was the message at my church. The message that President Obama and family heard was the religious right, the captains of the religious right are trying to bring blacks back to the back of the bus, are trying to keep women in the kitchen and immigrants over the border. Who are these captains? Who are the captains that he references? I'm not sure who he's referencing, but I'm certainly not sure I like that that's the message on Easter. By the way, I think he offended 2 million Christians, 2 million worldwide when he went there.
Bob, you're religious, you're a Christian, but this is not your typical Christian message of division and hate. And to Eric's point, who is he talking about?
Well, first of all, let's try to step back a little bit. You said in your opening that it insulted half Americans out there. He was talking about the captains of the religious right.
Who?
You want to name one?
Who?
Pat Robertson. There's one for you.
And you think he's a bigot?
I certainly do.
Why? Because
and I also
he
think he's the one who said that the reason we have...
He has different religious beliefs?
Excuse me. He doesn't have different religion. We read from the same Bible. The difference is that the tolerance that Christ showed is Pat Robertson clearly didn't get that message because he's attacked gays in the worst kind of way, accused them of being responsible for all kinds of natural disasters. I mean, this is a guy who is, as a leader of the Christian Coalition, which now fortunately is bygone days, uses that position to say the most ridiculous political things. I don't think this guy should have done this.
Can you do me a favor? You're saying Pat Robertson did. Have you heard Pat Robertson be a racist, a misogynist, or an anti?
I've heard nothing about putting women back in the kitchen from Pat Robertson.
But Reverend Leon did not say anything about gays. He said blacks. He said women.
Yeah, he also said gays and to keep gays in the closet. But let me just say.
First of all, everyone's saying he did.
Wait a second.
That was tweeted by someone.
Okay.
I haven't heard confirmation of that yet either.
Do I think it was a good message on Easter Sunday?
No.
No. Do I think that the only reason we're running this story is because Obama was in this church? Of course, that's why we're running the story, so that all you conservatives could beat up on him.
Kimberly, Jay Carney was asked about this today. I want you to take a listen to what he had to say about what the White House is saying about this very inflammatory sermon.
Was he surprised, were you surprised that the Reverend Leon decided to get so political and attack leaders of the religious right, at one point saying that they want, quote, blacks to be back in the back of the bus? It seemed sort of odd for Easter. Were you surprised by that?
Well, I wasn't there, and I have not spoken with the president. This was a sermon that at a church here that's been visited by presidents of both parties for many, many years, and I think you know, I don't have anything more on it for you.
It's probably a tough predicament for him, Kimberly, but this church is very, very liberal. They have openly gay, non-celibate priests. They have had a gay bishop in the past, and not as inflammatory, but in 2001, this same reverend urged President Bush in a political way to put an end to xenophobia. So he does have a history of preaching politics from the pulpit.
Politicizing his sermons, and that's what he did. I don't think this was appropriate at all. I mean, Bob, you were the first one to say that it was inappropriate for Dr. Ben Carson to politicize the National Prayer Record.
So
you should, equally take issue with this situation, which I think is far worse because it's Easter Sunday, and for him to make these inflammatory remarks, especially in a house of worship that is known to be the place of worship of presidents, and then to do this and to call out these specific groups is really not the Christian message of what Jesus would want to be said in a church. I'll tell you
Well,
that
the president seems to attract these types of radicals. He must have felt right at home. I mean, this is right off of Reverend Wright's playbook right here. And then he did this before. I think in 2010 he went to the Shiloh Church, and the sermon there compared Fox News to the KKK, compared Rush Limbaugh to the KKK, talked about Jim Crow. Should the president have left the pews and just walked right out? I don't really know if he has the stones for that. It would have made a big impression.
Do you think he was trying to impress President Obama, or maybe become more political than he has in past because he was sitting in the pew?
Frankly, if we didn't have that footage of Obama walking out of that church, do you think we'd lead with this story?
Well, we have reporters inside talking about what the sermon was. So yeah, I think we would still.
See that picture right there? That's the only reason we're talking about it.
It's not manufactured.
The president of the United States goes to an anti-Christian church sermon.
Anti-Christian church
during Easter. Listen, love thy neighbor like you love thyself, right? This guy's slamming the religious right as a bunch of bigots. He can't give any examples.
The religious right. He said captains of the religious right.
But is his message divisive or not? Is that message, that sermon?
I think yes, and I thought it was inappropriate. However, that does not excuse a number of people who politicize from the pulpit on the right, like Pat Robertson. I think everybody ought to stop politicizing from the pulpit.
So, but the point is, the president attended the service. It doesn't matter whether it's Easter service or any other day, any other religious day, any day. You shouldn't use the pulpit of any church to get into politics.
Why didn't Jay Carney condemn him then?
I didn't.
How easy
wishy-washy.
If Jay Carney would have just said, listen, we don't agree with his comments. What he said was inappropriate. The president didn't know he was going to say that, and it's Easter. Move on.
What baffles me is
why do you keep saying Easter?
What baffles me is that President Obama has had a history of sitting in controversial churches, and he actually disassociated himself, even though he really can't, with the church and Pastor Jeremiah Wright after 20 years, 2 decades sitting in the pews. You would think that Jay Carney would stand up and say, we don't agree with this kind of rhetoric. However, this is the exact same rhetoric we heard, Kimberly, during the presidential election about the war on women and the bigoted comments.
So perhaps that's why people weren't so surprised, because we've heard this kind of thing before. You know, and if I were the president, I'd be very careful to distance myself from this kind of inflammatory, bigoted sermon that he shouldn't even be listening to. If he knows, you know, who this reverend is and the kind of message that he gives, I mean, I wouldn't be caught in there, no way, especially Easter Sunday.
I think in fairness to this minister, he's been here for about 8 or 9 or 10 years, and he has not had a history of inflammatory comments. It is, I go back to if everybody would preach the word and forget about politics. You know, when Paul said, give up to the Romans, what was the line from the Bible? Render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. I mean, it's just there's no place for this here.
So then,
why are you? Yeah. Why?
Because I think that the reason
there's no place, the other side is saying,
I think the reason I'm saying this is that I think this gives us, it gives those of you who don't like Obama a perfect launch pad to attack him.
It has nothing to do with liking him or not. The problem is we take issue with the sermon, with the message. It was inappropriate. You say this reverend doesn't have a history of this, so then he chose Easter Sunday, one of the most holiest days of the year, to unload with this kind of evil spewing forward against a party with no proof to say that.
And we've heard over the last couple of weeks a number of Republicans come out in favor of gay marriage, in favor of comprehensive immigration reform. When's it going to be enough? When is it going to be enough for them to stop painting us as bigots and xenophobic?
That's a great point. Sarah Palin, number 2 on the ticket. She's not a woman in the kitchen. Okay, Tim Scott, South Carolina Senator, first black South Carolina Senator in history. And then Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. Two of the leaders of the Senate right now.
I'm not going to sit here.
They're Hispanics. We don't want to throw them.
If you want to defend, I'm not going to sit here and defend what this guy said. You want to defend what Pat Robertson has said over the years?
No, but how about this?
I don't think Pat Robertson is the leader of the religious right in this country.
You don't know.
Hold on, Jesse.
I think that's the 1990s.
You forget your history.
That's the 1990s.
Oh, I see. That's still part of the. He was a leader of the Christian.
There's other leaders, and I'm not here to defend Pat Robertson. What I'm here to say is this guy is out of line.
Well, then say Pat Robertson was out of line.
Some of the things he said was out of line.
Oh, good. Okay.
I don't agree with everything he says.
All right, good. That's
fine. This guy is an anti-Christian.
This has nothing to do with this guy. It's everything to do with the people who, at the 5, who decided they wanted to run this tape because of Obama. It's
look, can I throw some, I don't know, sanity into discussion? First of all, Bob, you were complaining, as Kimberly points out, about Ben Carson at the prayer breakfast.
That's correct.
Using that venue
Which is a political venue.
To have some sort of opinion on politics. This is the exact same thing, only on a much more holy day, Easter Sunday, when a lot of people...
I think I've been consistent. I said that Carson should not have used it for politicization, and this guy should not have used it for politicization.
Okay, so then what's
I don't
the
think
argument?
anybody should use it for politicization.
So stop defending the guy.
I'm not defending him.
Let me ask you this. If it were John Boehner who went and heard that same sermon, would we do this? Would we do this block?
Of course not.
Of course we would.
No, we wouldn't.
Absolutely
Wait
would.
a second. That's a good point. If Boehner was in a church service and the guy was ripping on gays, ripping on women, ripping on blacks, and he sat there, you don't think the mainstream media would cover that?
Grow up,
You don't think the mainstream media would cover that?
Grow up. You
I think
for a second we're not doing this because of Obama?
All right, very
oh, yeah,
quickly,
we covered. Sure we
this
would.
was not